conference report. I think that, I'm standing a little bit far away. Maybe I should turn up my audio. Be prepared. So I do think the question, the phenomena, noumena issue, whatever it is, or however I'd like to rename it, is an important issue. There's a lot of things in the language that we talk about that are interesting in the way that they bring in assumptions. Like you said, I was talking about modeling the world, and I do use that language. But technically, what we're modeling is our perceptions. And this is what keeps everything internal in terms of our reasoning and our epistemology. I do think that that solves the technical problems involved, but there's some less technical problems that aren't fully addressed. So it involves things like a need for an external ontology or an absolute ontology, because I say, yeah, perceptions exist. That's what I start my reasoning from. But I'm not saying perceptions exist from all points of view, like the point of view of a rock or a photon. So this is how I avoid needing a metaphysical ontology. It's still an ontology. These are the basic unreduced things, is the perceptions, insofar as even when I reduce them like to a material understanding and model. Okay, I think this works pretty well, because now when we have the perceptions and we make a model, it's a fundamental change in what we think that model is. Suddenly the model is not even a thing. It's a machine. It's a program that generates, or virtually generates, or is meant to generate perceptions that would match the stream of perceptions if the given circumstances of the modeling match, right? So it's not a thing. It's a program that creates perceptions. So even in my idea, it's not really of a thing. That why I call it a thing has to do with naming, the semiotic, symbolism. Interesting subject, but I don't think that's going to lead us to any kind of contradiction, because what we're naming is a system that generates, pseudo-perceptions, or generates, a list, a description of perceptions that I could then compare to perceptions I get from my actual stream of perceptions. And again, just for everybody, I'm talking about all perceptions of hunger, love, hallucinations. These are all perceptions. Sense perceptions are sense perceptions, but perceptions in general are perceptions in general. Okay, so I think this solves the technical problems of epistemology, of objectivist epistemologies. Now, the way it fails is our life is the focus of our philosophy, according to me. And it would seem that to actually make use of some of these models, you do have to believe that they're in this external world. Now, I have some technical solutions to the problems calling it external, insofar as it's a shared world. It's intersubjective. It's between us. Okay, and this is actually why will is so important to me, because the only way to get this intersubjective world is to admit there's other subjective entities. And if we have no will, then the appearance of those subjective entities as individual agents is an illusion, just like the illusion of my agency would have to be a conclusion of determinism. So in order to overcome solipsism, I need to believe that I have a will, and it's possible for things to have wills, and then I grant that. And then it's the relationship between us is what's called external. Okay. So anyway, though, it does seem like we have to commit to believing something, is real. We feel the solidity of it, this sort of ontological feeling that it really exists. And so, the fact that we have to give into that as a practicality, to me, is a problem that goes beyond the technical issue of how can the terms work out and be consistent. But notice, if we have these perceptions and we notice, look, I can make a model, and it basically generates those same perceptions, at least some subset of it that I'm identifying that relate to the model. So what if in the real world there's something like my model? But this does not make us think that there's things in the real world, right? Because there's not things in our head. There's programs that generate these perceptions. So it would not be things, but it would be systems that generate perceptions. So Stizor said, A beer can is a beer can, for example. You know, a rose is a rose. I'm like, no, a rose is chemicals. It's a chemical process. It's organic chemistry. You know, it's not a thing. It has no sharp boundary. There's molecules and energy flying off of it and going into it. And at its edges, there's a fuzzy part that I identified as another thing. So is a beer can a beer can? Well, I mean, I don't drink beer from cans. I don't think beer should be put in cans. So to me, it's an aluminum can that happens to have beer in it. Or the beer can is an ashtray. You know, once the beer is out, and since I don't drink much beer in cans, I mean, I'm not like ethically against it, but I never buy beer in cans. It's really just an ashtray that happens to have beer in it until I empty the beer so I can use it appropriately. Or what if I put apple juice in my beer can? Is it a misused beer can because ontologically it's a beer can and it's got apple juice in it, so it's an apple juice can? And now none of those confusions could be considered at all if we just realize it's a system. And when I interpret it as a beer can, it's because of my intentional use for it, or what I think it's supposed to be, or usually, or is being used for. So this is the way I think about this. And in terms of the ontology, you know, to repeat, I'm not modeling the real world. To say the real world presupposes that it's there, and what am I doing to it? No. I have a relationship to my stream of perceptions. It is my perceptions that I am modeling. My modeling becomes good enough that I think, hey, something like my model is generating these perceptions in the first place. And yet I find out, well, no, because my model of a rose has the colors and the smells, and what's actually generating it, if you look close enough, has chemical properties. You know, it has energy being radiated or reflected. And it's not at all like my model, really. It's not at all like the model that I use ontologically. When I think of a rose and I don't think of all the biochemistry or even know what all the chemicals are, I know that that's dissimilar from the thing, the system that's generating the perceptions in reality. So when I say in reality, technically I'm not saying it's external. I'm saying the reality of the perceptions as which I interact with, taking the consistent perceptions and breaking the things down, tearing them up, doing chemical tests in the lab, those really consistent perceptions that are available to us, they make it look like the rose is something quite different than what I am experiencing it as in the ontology of a rose is a rose or a beer can is a beer can. Cheers.